Imagine struggling to pay rent, medical bills, groceries, and debt, while Washington creates a $0.7 billion fund for political allies who say they were victims of government weaponization. That is not a hypothetical. That is now a real fight inside the United States government. And critics are warning that this could become one of the most controversial uses of federal power in years. Stay with this report, like this video, and subscribe to Progressive Wave, because this story is not just about Donald Trump. It is about whether justice in America is becoming a system where ordinary people get punished and powerful people get paid. The Trump administration has announced what it calls the Anti-Weaponization Fund, worth $1.776 billion. According to the Associated Press, the fund is part of a settlement resolving President Trump's lawsuit against the Internal Revenue Service over the leak of his tax returns. The official explanation is simple. People who believe they were politically targeted by the Biden administration's Justice Department will now have a process to apply for compensation. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche called it a lawful way for victims of lawfare and government weaponization to be heard and seek redress. But here is where the story gets much bigger. This fund is not being created in a vacuum. It is being created by the same administration whose leader has spent years claiming that the justice system was used against him, his allies, and his movement. And now, through a settlement tied to Trump's own lawsuit, a massive pool of public money is being opened for people who claim they were mistreated for political reasons. That raises a question every taxpayer should be asking tonight. Who decides who gets paid? Because $1.7 billion is not symbolic. That is not a press release. That is real money. Public money. Money that comes from a government where millions of people are told there is not enough for housing, not enough for healthcare, not enough for schools, not enough for veterans, not enough for disaster victims, not enough for the poor. But somehow, there may be enough to compensate politically connected people who say they were targeted. Democrats and watchdog groups are already calling the arrangement corrupt and unconstitutional. That does not mean every claim made by every applicant is false. It does mean the structure of this fund demands scrutiny. Because when political allies are placed in a position to benefit from a government-created payout system, the public has a right to know exactly how that system works, who qualifies, who reviews the claims, and what evidence is required. And that is the missing context. The word weaponization sounds serious because it is serious. Government power can absolutely be abused. Prosecutors can overreach. Agencies can act unfairly. Innocent people can be crushed by the machinery of the state. When that happens, there should be accountability. But accountability cannot become a private relief program for people close to power. That is the line at the center of this story. Is this a genuine attempt to correct abuse? Or is it a political reward system dressed up in the language of justice? The available information does not prove the answer yet, but it does raise a set of questions too serious to ignore. If an ordinary American believes they were harmed by government misconduct, do they get access to $1 billion fund? If a protester, whistleblower, immigrant, student, journalist, or poor defendant says the government abused its power, do they get this kind of fast lane? Or is this kind of redress only available when the people claiming injury are close to the president? That contrast is why this story matters. Because in America, the legal system already treats power differently. Wealthy defendants can hire elite lawyers. Poor defendants often plead out just to survive. Corporations settle cases without admitting wrongdoing. Ordinary people spend years trying to get basic justice. And now the federal government is creating a massive compensation fund for people who argue they were victims of political law enforcement. That may sound like reform, but critics argue it looks like selective justice. The administration says this is about making sure government is never weaponized against any American.
They've had a big fight, like
but the phrase "any American"
they fight
is
like
doing a
hell.
lot of work.
You can't stop them. Let them fight
Because
for
the
about
fund,
2-3 minutes.
as described
it's
in
easy
the
to stop
reporting,
them.
is aimed at allies of the Republican president who
Yeah,
believe they were
strong language.
mistreated
Every
by
once
the
in a while you
Biden
have to use a
administration
certain
Justice
word.
Department. That is not a small detail. That is the architecture of the controversy. A justice system cannot function if each administration comes into power, declares the previous investigations illegitimate, and then uses taxpayer money to compensate its own side. That is not neutral accountability. That is how law becomes a battlefield, and public trust becomes collateral damage. And there is another layer. The same Justice Department now warning about politicized law enforcement has itself faced accusations that investigations and prosecutions under Trump have targeted political opponents. So the question becomes even sharper. Is this administration opposing the weaponization of government, or redefining weaponization so it only applies when its own allies are on the receiving end? That is the contradiction viewers need to watch closely. Because if the standard is real, it should apply across the board. It should apply to Republicans, Democrats, protesters, journalists, activists, whistleblowers, immigrants, and ordinary people with no political connections at all. But if the standard only protects one political camp, then it is not justice. It is power protecting itself. And this is where the stakes become national. $1.7 billion could reshape the incentives inside government. It could encourage more political claims against law enforcement decisions. It could reward people for framing prosecutions as persecution. It could make every future investigation look like the beginning of the next payout fight. And it could deepen the belief that law in America is no longer about facts, evidence, and equal standards, but about which side controls the Department of Justice. That is dangerous territory. Because once the public believes justice is just politics with a badge, the damage is not easy to repair. People stop trusting courts. They stop trusting prosecutors. They stop trusting investigations. And when trust collapses, the most powerful people benefit first, because they are the ones best equipped to survive chaos. Ordinary people are not. Ordinary people need rules that apply equally. Ordinary people need courts that do not bend toward donors, presidents, insiders, or media celebrities. Ordinary people need a government that can admit wrongdoing without turning accountability into a partisan cash machine. And that is why this story cannot be treated as just another Washington headline. At its core, this is about whether the justice system belongs to the people or whether it is becoming another prize captured by political power. It is about whether public money is being used to repair actual harm or to strengthen a narrative that benefits those already closest to the center of power. The administration says this fund gives victims a voice. Critics say it gives Trump allies a payout. The truth will depend on the details. Who applies, who gets approved, what evidence is shown, how transparent the process is, and whether the same standard would ever be offered to people outside the president's political circle. Until those answers are public, skepticism is not cynicism. It is civic self-defense. So here is the question. If Washington can find $1.7 billion for this, what else has it been telling ordinary Americans it cannot afford? Comment below. Do you see this as justice for people wrongly targeted, or as a dangerous political payout funded by the public? Share this report with someone who still believes the system treats everyone the same. And subscribe to Progressive Wave, because when power writes checks to its own circle, democracy needs witnesses.